Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what time of day you're watching this video. This topic is Unit 3, the Holocaust, a super rapid review video of terms going at 5 times regular speed for students who were away sick or absent or who want to rewatch some of the material from the classroom. Here we go at 5 times regular speed. These are some of the terms we're going to go through, and I'm going to go over to the next list. So we've got about 38 terms to go through super fast at 5 times regular speed, hopefully in less than 30 minutes or 40 minutes. We'll see how long this takes. Make sure to continue to study the 10 stages of genocide and review what each and every stage means. Okay, punishable acts under Article 3 of the genocide definition. Make sure you review and study these and be able to connect this to the Holocaust as well as the 10 stages of genocide. Okay, so there's a video that you can watch if you were absent from class called Hitler's Circle of Evil, Episode 2, and there's a couple spots to make sure that you watch. For example, the 15-minute mark, blaming the Jews is an example of scapegoating. Okay, now go to the next slide, and we're going to skip over watching that video for this ultra-fast video review. Take a look at Hitler's consolidation of power, learning about how a totalitarian dictator rises to power and eliminates the systems of democracy could be critically important into preventing future genocides and totalitarian governments in the future. Also, take a look at the 33-minute mark at the Reichstag fire, another example of the Nazis scapegoating communists in this situation to take emergency powers, end civil liberties, end democracy, arrest communists. So this is a really important event that we need to be aware of to understand how to prevent the death of democracy in the future. Okay, we're getting the first speed. We're skipping straight over term 1 to term 2, anti-Semitism, discrimination, hatred, or dislike of the Jews. Pause this if you want to read the full definition here. Term number 3, Christ killers. Christ killers. The myth that Jews collectively murdered Jesus, also referred to as deicide, has been used to justify violence against the Jews for centuries. The Roman Empire had the power at this time. Significance: this is faulty logic is used as an excuse for justifying racism. Term number 4, blood libel. Blood libel is a myth and accusation that Jewish people will steal children for their blood and religious rituals. This myth evolved from Passover traditions. Term number 5, scapegoat. Scapegoat. Burning of the Reichstag is an example, but the definition of scapegoat is a person who is blamed for the wrongdoings, mistakes, or faults of others. Historical Jewish people often targeted as scapegoats throughout European history. Nazis blamed the Jewish people for economic problems, and even Hitler blamed the Jews for the start of World War II. Hitler and the Nazis blamed the Jews for almost everything. You could say the room is too hot or too cold, and the Jews are going to be blamed for both things, even though it's two different extremes. Okay, scapegoat example, burning of the Reichstag. Okay, this is one that was actually blamed on communists as a reason for the Germans to consolidate power. This is a really important event to study thoroughly. Significance: the resulting act abolished constitutional protections and paved the way for Nazi dictatorships. People lost civil liberties, and the Nazis consolidated power, and democracy ended. Term number 5, scapegoat, slide 3 of 3 example. The supposed arsonist was a Dutchman, Maurits van der Lubbe, who some have claimed was brought to the scene by the crime scene by Nazi agents. Others have contended that there was proof of Nazi complicity in the crime, but Hitler merely capitalized, or there's no proof, sorry, but the Nazis used this as an opportunity. So this is debated about how this was, but in the end, this is a key event where the Nazis consolidated power. Term number 6, pogrom. A racist riot that turns into a massacre that may or may not be very organized, primarily referring to massacres of Jews. Significance: pogroms in Europe were somewhat frequent against Jewish groups. This shows ongoing severe and violent racism in Europe against Jewish people. There's a video that we watched in class of an example of a pogrom in England. You can review this on your own time for extra review if you're absent that class. Nationalism. If you look up nationalism in an encyclopedia or equivalent, you'll find a very, very long explanation. This is an overly simplified explanation with simplifying many different ways of looking at nationalism into two quick concepts, A and B. So A is creating, building, or improving a nation state among a group with shared national identity, and B is extreme nationalism is often associated with racism, where one national group asserts they are superior to other nations and people groups. Extreme nationalism causes people to be willing to harm other people to further their national goals. Significance: the Nazi Party had the values of extreme nationalism as core to their philosophy. Number 7, are you able to think of examples of nationalism throughout the world of various kinds? Term number 8, Hitler. Hitler was the leader of Nazi Germany. He wrote a book in prison with his ideas and racism towards the Jewish people. He was a passionate public speaker. Propaganda techniques, including strong images and simple message, helped propel Austrian-born Hitler from a little-known extremist to leading a candidate in Germany's 1932 presidential elections. There are many significant things to know about Hitler. He was a compelling leader because of his public speaking ability. This is significant because many people were loyal to him. Studying how Hitler convinced people to follow him towards genocide might prevent another genocide. Another key thing that was significant about Hitler was that he was arrested and spent time in prison. Perhaps if he had stayed in prison longer, the world would be different. Another thing that is significant about Hitler is he wrote Mein Kampf in prison. Another thing was he was actually banned from public speaking after he was released from prison as part of his parole. Perhaps if he was continued to be monitored for hate speech and banned from public speaking in this way, the Holocaust could have been avoided. This helps us to think about how to regulate hate speech in terms of how to prevent future genocides, and then, of course, the complicated issue of how do we define hate speech. Term number 9, Mein Kampf equals My Struggle. This was a book about Hitler's vision that included concepts about anti-Semitism and Lebensraum, which means living space. Hitler blamed the Jews for the problems of both capitalism and communism. Significance: Hitler's racism against the Jews was not a secret. Hitler's views on Lebensraum were not a secret. The application of Lebensraum was that Germany would need more land to the east to add to their country through war, and the people on that land would be killed in large numbers. Term number 10, NSDAP. This is the acronym for the National Socialist German Workers' Party. That's the English version, of course. Core to their philosophy includes anti-Semitism, racism, racial hierarchy, and extreme nationalism. Those are some simplified core concepts. Each of those concepts could be expanded, and they are expanded in our textbook. Make sure you understand those core concepts that are core to the Nazi Party. Aryan race. The Nazi Party considered the Aryan race to be ideal, which was a Northern European look. Significance: this was a very racist belief. Some historians argue that the Aryan race does not actually exist. Number 12, racial science. This is a science that is racist and tries to categorize groups into superior or inferior using pseudoscience to try to do so. Term number 13, Joseph Goebbels. He led the propaganda media in Germany to increase racism. He was in charge of radio, televisions, and movies. There is a significant amount of information in the videos that we've been watching in our class. Make sure if you were absent, you review those videos. Significance: this relates to the stage polarization. He's a great example of propaganda and polarization. Studying polarization, and how to prevent polarization could have huge impacts in the present and the future on current politics and future politics. This is also significant because genocide would not have happened without propaganda increasing polarization and racism. Evidence of this would be that the Jewish boycott was not well supported at first by the German population at large. Goebbels realized he had to increase the racism of the German people group. The wonderful engineers engineer my classroom with lights that automatically turn off every so often to save power. Let's hope I can get through the rest of this video before the lights turn off again. This is significant because this relates to the crime in Article 3, incitement to commit genocide. Make sure you're familiar with the legal definition of genocide so you can make connections from the Holocaust to the legal definition of genocide, as well as the 10 stages. Term number 13, Joseph Goebbels' video on the next slide. Clips to notice. Okay, so here are some clips to notice from this video. The most important clips to watch and rewatch are probably at 6 minutes, the Jewish boycott. At 9 minutes, Goebbels realizes that the Jewish boycott was a failure in terms that a large amount of Germans did not support it, and he needed to work with propaganda to increase the racism of the German population through propaganda and increase polarization. Another thing to watch in here at 39 minutes is Himmler experiments in Austria with anti-Semitism. At 41 minutes, Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass. An increase in Jewish persecution, a huge increase that is one of the turning points. There's many kinds of propaganda. You should at least know that propaganda is trying to convince or sell ideas with lies, half-truths, or spin. But there's many rich ways of describing various different kinds of propaganda. For example, Noam Chomsky talks about how governments will try to convince a population to support a war effort with a concept called manufacturing consent to basically help the population consent to the war effort, and often using tools and strategies like focus of what is on the media. By using focus of what is on the media can focus on true statements that are important to the narrative to help people support the government agenda. Therefore, it's also important to ask what is being omitted and left out of the narrative in the news story. Why are some stories not being covered? In 1929, Hitler appointed Himmler as the leader of the SS. Pause this slide if you need to take some notes on this slide. Hitler entrusted Himmler with the implementation of the final solution of the Jewish question, and in turn 6 million Jews lost their lives in the Holocaust. Now that is a simplification because then Himmler delegated that to Heydrich, who then also brought in other people along like Eichmann. Reinhard Heydrich and Adolf Eichmann worked under the authority of Himmler. All three of them could be called architects of the Holocaust. Which one is the architect? That could be debated. They all could have that label, the architect of the Holocaust. Himmler was a key high-ranking leader leading the Holocaust. Perhaps understanding the psychology of leaders like Himmler and these other guys, Heydrich and Eichmann, may prevent genocides in the future. If you were absent from class when we watched episode 7 of Hitler's Circle of Evil, the last half of this video is important to understand Heydrich and the Holocaust. The SS was the staff of the genocide. The SS was the primary middle management leaders and workers of the genocide. They did bring in extra manpower when needed to assist the SS, but the SS was the main people in charge of the genocide of the Holocaust. The SS evolved to become an elite Nazi security service which was not bound by any laws. Reinhard Heydrich and the SS take control of breaking Czech resistance in Moravia and Bohemia. The SS is the force that implemented the Holocaust. Reinhard Heydrich was hired by Himmler into the SS for the purpose of creating the SD. The SD would be part of the SS and under the authority of Himmler. That's a secret spy service to try and gather information. The SS are also famous for having symbols that go with their uniform, including the Totenkopf. The SS were also used to staff the Einsatzgruppen, mobile killing squads that followed the main army into Russia, killing people with bullets and killing about 1.5 million, so very large numbers of people. Nuremberg laws. Term number 17 is incredibly important. Can you name some examples of Nuremberg laws? Number 1, Jews could not fly the German flag and were forbidden to employ domestic service subjects of German blood. Jews could not vote. Jews were not citizens and had no human rights. This also applied to Roma. Black people also faced persecution in Nazi Germany. Jews cannot have public office. It is unlawful for Jews to have sexual relations with a German. September 1941, Jews had to wear a yellow star, stage symbolization. There's more laws to this. This is just a quick sample. They didn't all come in at once. There's also laws about Germans not having young women in their service cleaning their homes to prevent sexual relations. It goes on and on. Nuremberg laws. Significance. This is significant because it is an example of the stages, many stages, but especially stage 1 classification, stage 2 symbolization, stage 3 discrimination, and even stage 6 polarization, and arguments could be made for other stages as well. If you were absent for class for this video, make sure you watch this video about Nuremberg race laws. Discrimination is stage 3 of the 10 stages leading to genocide. And in order to fight against genocide, we need to also fight against all the different stages of genocide, including the stage discrimination. And we need to look to our own country about how we can reduce racism, reduce discrimination, and or, if possible, eliminate discrimination. And to also look at the histories that our own country has made, including the story of Viola Desmond in the country of Canada. Kristallnacht. This was a nationwide pogrom in Germany carried out in part by the SA. This was named after all the broken glass left in the streets. Although some people died, this event is not a good example of extermination, execution stage. This is a better example of the stage persecution because the goal was spreading fear through the destruction of property. Yes, also violence. And yes, also some people died and many people were arrested. About 30,000 people. The pretext for the pogroms was a shooting in Paris on November 7th of German diplomat Ernst von Romps, a Polish Jewish student. So a Polish Jewish student in France killed a German diplomat, triggering Kristallnacht. Significance. This is significant because it is an example of the stages of polarization, discrimination, and persecution. This is significant because the Jewish community was forced to pay fine for damages, which is another persecution on top of persecution. So Kristallnacht definitely was a turning point, a game changer, an increase in persecution and fear. And so already Jewish people were leaving. Already it was a problem for some countries that did not want to receive refugees. The countries already had discussed this over and over again, but they had discussed this at Evian Conference, how to deal with Jewish refugees. In the summer of 1938, delegates from 32 countries met at the French resort of Evian. Roosevelt chose not to send a high-level official, such as the Secretary of State, to Evian. Instead, Myron C. Taylor, a businessman and a close friend of Roosevelt's, represented the U.S. at the conference. During the 9-day meeting, delegate after delegate rose to express sympathy for the refugees, but most countries, including the United States and Britain, offered excuses for not letting in more refugees. Significance. This conference showed unwillingness to help and the racism in the international community. I should slow down on term number 20, St. Louis cruise ship, because this ship has a Canadian connection and it's likely to be on the test. Jewish refugees aboard the MS St. Louis were denied entry to Canada. Sadly, 254 of its passengers later perished in the Holocaust. Significant. This is significant because Canada could have acted to save lives. This is a missed opportunity. Take a look at this quote here. At the time, religious intolerance and anti-Semitism were common in the Canadian society, even in its cultural and political leaders, right up to the Prime Minister William Lyon Mackenzie King. We must nevertheless seek to keep this part of the continent free from unrest and from too great an intermixture of foreign strains of blood, as much as the same thing lies at the basis of the Oriental problem. I fear we would have riots if we agreed to a policy that admitted a number of Jews. Excerpt from the King's Private Diary, 29 March 1938, quoted by Eli Yari on the Canadian Encyclopedia. Well, away on official business, King asked Undersecretary of State for External Affairs Oscar Skeleton to consult on the matter with the Minister of Justice Ernest Lapointe and Frederick Blair, the Director of the Government of Canada's Immigration Branch. Lapointe was empathetically opposed to admitting refugees, and Blair argued that they did not qualify under current immigration laws that he had created. No country, according to Frederick Blair, could open its doors wide enough to take in the hundreds and thousands of Jewish people who want to leave Europe. The line must be drawn somewhere. Well, the ship was just 2 days from Halifax Harbor. It continued on its course for Europe. That's a quote from Canadian Encyclopedia author Eli Yari. Term number 21, Action T4. The Nazi euthanasia program was to kill people with mental and physical disabilities. In the Nazi view, this would cleanse the Aryan race of people considered genetically defective and a financial burden to society. Holocaust, or Shoah. These are terms that refer to the genocide of Jews during the Nazi regime. Term number 26, Einsatzgruppen, slide 1 of 2. These are mobile killing squads, task force, special action groups, or units of the security police and SD and SS that followed the German army as it invaded occupied countries in Europe, often referred to as mobile killing squads. They are best known for their role in systematic murder of Jews and mass shooting operations in Soviet territory. The mobile killing squads killed 1.5 to 2 million people with bullets. There were many reasons to switch to experimenting with poisonous gas. Some of the reasons included bureaucratic efficiency, saving the metal from the bullets, and several other reasons. Holocaust by bullets and mobile killing squads often go together. This refers to the early stages of the Holocaust when Jews were killed by mobile killing squads, example Babi Yar in Ukraine. Term number 28, collaborators with Nazis. And this is a huge concept with all kinds of different levels. Some people more willing collaborators and some people more forced to collaborate at gunpoint with a threat of death. But it is a huge, complicated thing because the Nazis could not have done the huge genocide they did without the help and support of people willing to collaborate with the Nazis. Significance: collaborators committed some of the worst atrocities of the Holocaust era. In order to prevent genocide in the future, research may be beneficial in the psychology of collaboration with genocidal authority. And we're going to talk about that in a much later slide about the psychology of why people are willing to collaborate or obey unethical authority figures and unethical orders when they perhaps somewhere inside them do not want to comply with the unethical order. Term number 29, Babi Yar. This is a famous ravine in the Ukraine where Jews were shot and then dumped into the ravine. There's a whole video to go with this, so I'm going to go really fast on the slide. Make sure you watch the video about Babi Yar, although I should give you a warning that it is a very violent story, so perhaps you may want to read about this story if you do not like to watch the visual violence in the video. Okay, again, I should just repeat the warning. This Babi Yar video has extreme violence and a rape scene, so, well, they don't really show anything in the video, but they discuss it in graphic detail. Therefore, you feel free to skip this video and read about the story of Babi Yar if you are worried that the video may be too much for you. Term number 30, Wannsee Conference, or Wannsee Conference. The W's are pronounced like a V in the German language. On January 20th, 1942, 15 high-ranking Nazi Party and German government officials gathered in a villa in Berlin on the suburb of Wannsee to discuss and coordinate the implementation of what they called the final solution of the Jewish question. The Wannsee Conference was chaired by Reinhard Heydrich, who designed the final solution. Significance: the mass murder of the Jews by Nazi Germany and its collaborators required the coordination and cooperation of government agencies throughout Axis-controlled Europe. This term is a really key term as an example of the organization stage of the 10 stages of genocide. Term number 31, the General Government of Poland. On this very fast review, I'm going to ask you to pause here if you need more information from this slide. I'm going to take a look at the underlined things. The occupation of Poland was brutal. The SS experimented with their racist ideas in Poland. Important. At the very bottom, after the death of Reinhard Heydrich, the codename for the operation to exterminate Polish Jews was named after him as Action Reinhard, or Operation Reinhard. Term number 32, Reinhard Heydrich. This is a very important key player in the genocide. So this person may be on the test. He was under the command of Himmler. He was Himmler's chief lieutenant or second in command. The paramilitary corps known as the SS. Okay, so he worked in that, and he was given the task to organize and design the final solution, which eventually became the death camps and Holocaust. Before the death camps, he also organized mobile killing groups that killed Polish and Soviet Jews. His leadership with suppressing the Czech people raised his leadership role, but may also have set him up as a target for assassination. Now, he is a classic type Hollywood character for a villain. So when Hollywood is looking for a Nazi to get inspired by for a villain in a Hollywood movie, look no further than Reinhard Heydrich. In addition, you can think about there's many Hollywood movies that feature Nazis as villains, as well as all kinds of other genres, comics, and novels. Even Captain America fights Nazis, and Captain America also fights something called Hydra, which sounds very similar to Heydrich. Term number 32, Reinhard Heydrich. There go the lights. I can't pause it. Well, Heydrich was chairing the Wannsee Conference. He asked Eichmann to do a presentation during the Wannsee Conference. So both those characters were high level in the organization and preparation for the genocide. Heydrich was assassinated before the end of World War II and before the end of the Holocaust by the Czech resistance. Reinhard Heydrich is an example of organizational preparation stages in the 10-stage of genocide model. He was assassinated. Heydrich also was significant because he chaired the Wannsee Conference, which shows his leadership role in the Holocaust. Review: Heydrich was Also significant because he created operation groups called the Einsatzgruppen and eventually tasked these groups with annihilating the Jews in the Soviet Union after the regular army moved east. This shows his role in leading the earliest part of the extermination stage of the Holocaust, sometimes referred to as the Holocaust by bullets. Jews were dumped in a ravine called Babi Yar. Number 4, the code name for the operation to exterminate Polish Jews was named after him as Action Reinhardt or Operation Reinhardt. All right, so the reason why you've got this review slide here about Heydrich, you should probably pause and take a notes, because when it's laid out like this is a hint that these points might be something that may be looked at for questions on a quiz or test, where it's sort of a summary of things we've already looked at. This slide could actually hypothetically be an answer key for something that is on the quiz or test. So make sure you take a really close look at this slide. Okay, if you missed this video earlier, make sure you look at 27 minutes, the final solution, 30 minutes in the Holocaust by bullets, and 38 minutes in the Wannsee Conference. If you have not already seen this video that we discussed earlier, this is Hitler's Circle of Evil, Episode 7. We've discussed term 32 already, so we're going to move on from term 32 to Adolf Eichmann. Adolf Eichmann was a Nazi war criminal for his role in the Holocaust. Some may argue that his role was more upper-middle management, which is what he argued during his trial, with a focus on organization and preparation rather than an architect, designer, or basically he argued he was just a bureaucrat, not a genocidal maniac. Reinhardt was tasked with leading the design of the Holocaust. Nevertheless, Eichmann and Himmler could all be labeled architects of the Holocaust for their respective leadership roles. The following quote from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum shows that Eichmann is a good example of the preparation stage, since he was in charge of transportation of the Jews. This shows that he would be guilty of conspiracy to commit genocide and complicity in genocide, which are listed as crimes in Article 3 of the International Legal Definition of Genocide from the 1948 Genocide Convention. Of course, this was written after the Holocaust. In the autumn of 1941, Eichmann, then an SS Oberstleutnant, Lieutenant Colonel, and the chief of the RSHA Section 4B4, took part in discussions in which the annihilation of the European Jews was planned. Since Eichmann was to be in charge of transporting Jews from all over Europe to the killing centers, RSHA Chief Reinhard Heydrich asked Eichmann to prepare a presentation for the Wannsee Conference. That's from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, that quote. Here's another quote from Michael Berenbaum. Eichmann was to coordinate the details. Thus, although it was not generally known that the final solution was mass execution, Eichmann had in fact been named chief executioner. Thereby, he organized identification, assembly, and transportation of Jews from all over occupied Europe to their final destinations at Auschwitz and other extermination camps in German-occupied Poland. At first, Eichmann managed to escape justice and flee to Argentina, where eventually he was captured by Israeli spy operatives, which smuggled him onto a plane out of Argentina back to Israel. And there was a lot of controversy and debate about how Israel acquired Adolf Eichmann, and his trial got a lot of media attention. There was also debate whether Eichmann was an evil mastermind or a banal bureaucrat that started after Eichmann's trial and execution in Israel. This controversy started because of a philosopher, Hannah Arendt, a German-born Jewish-American political philosopher, published Eichmann in Jerusalem, a report on the banality of evil. This is the idea that an obedient bureaucrat then also became controversial again with research of Stanley Milgram on the obedience to order that caused humans to harm other humans. Term number 33, Adolf Eichmann has this really fascinating video on the story of his being tracked down in Argentina. Term number 34, Hermann Göring. Hermann Göring was a high-ranking Nazi leader with connections to the German wealthy elite. He was a key in Hitler's rise to power, providing key connections to wealth and power, including Hindenburg. At his trial, although Göring denied his guilt, the court ruled him guilty of the common plan or conspiracy, crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. He was instrumental in Hitler being named chancellor by having conversations with President Hindenburg. He also was considered very successful during the German invasion of France and promoted in prestige, but he had a failure in the Battle of Britain in terms of Hitler's viewpoint. Göring was pronounced guilty on all 4 counts. I'm going fast on this quick review, so pause on this slide if you haven't read it already. I'm going really fast on this review slide, so take a look at this article sometime. There'll be this article posted into Microsoft Teams where you can take a look at this link and take a look at this article. Term number 35, ghettos. Ghettos are a place of forced segregation. Nazis used ghettos to temporarily house Jews before moving them to concentration camps. Pause on this slide. If you haven't taken notes on ghettos' significance, the ghettos are a good example of the organization preparation stage and persecution stages. In order to prevent genocide and reduce racism, some people may argue that governments and citizens should actively try to prevent the creation of ghettos, whether they are intentionally or created accidentally. Term number 36, concentration camp, is an umbrella term of many different types of concentration camp. But in summary, it is a prison camp for use to house prisoners of all kinds of types. It could be political prisoners, racial prisoners, or other types of prisoners. Later on, we'll get to a slide that will discuss extermination camps. But concentration camps could also include work camps and transit camps and other types of prison camps. Term number 37, extermination camp. There were 6 major extermination death camps in the Nazi regime: Chelmno, Belzec, Sobibor, where there was an uprising, Treblinka, Majdanek, Auschwitz, Birkenau. On this fast review, I'm going to go really fast over this Canadian connection, but you should be aware that Canada had Japanese internment camps to intern people. And in the city of Vancouver, very close to where many of us live, Japanese people were temporarily housed in a livestock building at the Pacific National Exhibition Grounds, also known as Playland, before they were loaded onto trains and sent further east. And the key thing to note is this was also very deplorable conditions. Sobibor Uprising. This is a very fascinating video of a fascinating story of resistance to genocide within a death camp. This video you may want to skip because of some scenes of violence and torture, but it has some interesting clips also. As we think about how to prevent genocides for the future, we may want to think about how to enact laws that prevent businesses from collaborating with genocidal regimes. And perhaps businesses have a lot of power and sway over genocidal regimes, and there were businesses, American businesses, that collaborated with the Nazis and worked with Nazis to do business to make a profit during the Holocaust. An American company called IBM, which stands for International Business Machines, supported the Nazis in their bureaucratic efficiency. And that bureaucratic efficiency is one of the reasons why the Holocaust could be considered a genocide without precedent, because of that bureaucratic efficiency and industrial, scientific power being brought to death and genocide. A common reaction we can see over and over again from the international community when it comes to genocide is something along the lines of, If only we had known, we would have done something more to prevent this tragedy. However, some of the evidence shows that there's many ways that the international community could have or should have known more about what was going on in many genocides, not just this genocide in particular. And perhaps the international community needs to be actively looking for the warning signs to help prevent genocide all over the world. So if you are interested in digging deeper and doing some research on the business collaboration with the Nazis, you could Google Coca-Cola and the Nazis, also Ford and the Nazis, and oil and the Nazis, and other businesses as well. You should also be familiar with the term fascism, which was developed in Mussolini's Italy. Take some time to Google fascism and make sure you have a working definition in your study guide memorized for the term fascism. It's a type of government that started in Italy which promotes extreme nationalism, strong military, strong police powers, low individual human rights, and one-party rule with most power in the executive branch under one strong autocratic leader. The economic policy is pro-business and anti-union and anti-labor rights. The goal is to make the country strong and at the expense of individual human rights. The police will use their increased powers to arrest opposition to the fascist party. Fascism is not democratic. Term 46 is a very sad and very tragic term, Sonderkommandos. It deserves its own category separate from the word collaborator, because this is prisoners, Jewish prisoners who are forced at the threat of death to perform a variety of duties as slaves in the gas chambers and the crematory of the Nazi camp system. They work primarily in the Nazi killing centers such as Auschwitz, but they are also used in other killing sites to dispose of the corpses of victims. So this is more in the category of slave labor than willing collaborators to genocide. The death camp Sobibor had about 600 of these kind of slaves at the death camp, and these people eventually led a resistance movement at the Sobibor death camp. Term number 47 is an important term. The experiment itself is incredibly controversial, but perhaps some of the findings in this experiment might eventually give us areas to research further to find more prevention strategies as we learn more as a society about why people psychologically might be willing to obey unethical orders. There's a video to go with this experiment. Make sure you read about this experiment if you were absent from the class when we talk about this experiment, and watch the video about the Milgram experiment. Make sure you can explain what this experiment was about and why this experiment is so important and significant for understanding the psychology. This is a video that can be found on YouTube. Just type in Milgram experiment into YouTube and you can watch this video if you missed this video. And just like the Milgram experiment, you should also know the key researcher, Stanley Milgram, who was an American social psychologist known for his controversial and groundbreaking experiments on obedience to authority. Milgram's obedience experiments, in addition to other studies that he carried out during his career, are generally considered to have provided important insight into human social behavior, particularly conformity and social pressure. That's a quote from Kiera Rogers. There's a whole movie made about this experiment called The Experimenter. There's a trailer that you can find on YouTube. Put in the word trailer and experimenter, and you can find this trailer if you were absent from class and missed looking at this. Now, it's always important to remember the words always and never are problematic when it comes to discussing history and groups of people. So not all Germans supported genocide, and not even all Nazis supported genocide, but eventually some Nazis and Germans rebelled against the system. At least they have evidence of Nazis trying to assassinate Hitler for whatever motivations they have decided that they want to assassinate Hitler. So there's not a generalization that can be made where all Germans supported Hitler or all Germans supported genocide. Sometimes this can be confused when we look at some of the historic propaganda, because during both World War I and World War II in Canada, Britain, and the United States of America, Germans and the propaganda that we saw, Germans are made to look like the bad guy, of course, in order to convince people to join the army and go fight in the wars. Klaus von Stauffenberg is a famous example of somebody participating in an assassination plot to try to kill Hitler. Bonus extra enrichment video. This will not be on the test, but if you're interested in this topic, there's something called the theory of stupidity, which is a crossover idea to think about. This is an interesting one because this was written about by somebody who experienced being in a concentration camp named Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and his argument was that it's stupidity rather than malice, which is the cause of most of the evil for most of the people participating in this insane system. However, it's a debatable topic, of course, but there's some arguments set forward that are fascinating. Study this term if you love learning for the sake of learning. This is definitely not going to be on the test, but it's an important one for the sake of learning. Some people can also argue, some historians could argue, that this is a missed opportunity to resist the aggression of Hitler. MS St. Louis, make sure you review this. This is likely to be on the test. Okay. On November 5th, 2000, members of the Canadian clergy gathered to apologize to 25 surviving members of the St. Louis passengers. Baptist minister Douglas Blair was among the clergymen who apologized. He's a great-nephew of Frederick Blair, who was the director of Canadian Immigration Branch in 1939. I've got a picture of my three boys on this slide to help me remember that this is important to make the world a better place for all people, all families, all kids in the world, including my own kids, so that my own children don't have to go through a genocide, a war, violence, civil war, revolution, and all kinds of trauma, tragedy, and evil mass tragedy. So, this is one of the reasons why it's so important to study and learn about these tragedies in order to prevent future tragedies and make the world a better place, a more peaceful place, where people can get along with each other and live in peace and harmony in community. Now, a huge key event is Hitler ordered the invasion of Poland in September 1939. This was the final straw for the French and British, so they declared war even though they were not ready. And this start of war also increased persecution of the Jews as the Nazis moved into Poland. Congratulations, you have made it to the very end of this PowerPoint and video. Thank you for watching. Do not forget to like and subscribe, and even copy the link to this video and share it with a friend if you so choose. That does help the algorithm for this video. Thank you very kindly for watching all the way to the end. Watching all the way to the end does also help the algorithm for this video. Of course, this is just rough draft number 3, but thank you so much for watching to the end. Now for a couple outtakes really fast. I'm gonna disappear. Okay, I disappeared. Oh, isn't that amazing how you can just disappear and reappear on a video? All right, so I did have several technical problems while recording this video. My overhead lights kept automatically turning off because I'm not close enough to the motion sensor. That's, I guess, a little bit of outtake information. And I didn't have a lot of jokes, and I'm not going to tell any right now because this is not the best topic for a whole bunch of funny jokes. I'll have to say that for a different historical video. But hey, check out some of my other videos on my YouTube channel if you are so inclined. Some other videos I might be more funny, maybe not, or just crazy. Alright, thank you for watching. Good luck with your studies. Remember, this is a video, so you can go somewhere in the middle. You can pause it. You can turn on captions, and you can watch with subtitles, and you can pause it and take notes to help you study, and then you can pause it just before a section and ask yourself questions to see if you remember what's on the next slide to test yourself. Alright, good luck studying. Have a good morning, afternoon, evening, and night, no matter where you are in the world. Stay calm, stay peaceful, stay safe. The end.